to God that it does work. It'd be a fantastic thing.
Mr. President,
Yeah, please, Rebecca.
Mr. President, on the economic front, there are reports that the coronavirus is really hurting your businesses, especially your hotels.
My businesses?
Yeah,
Sure.
so is that true, and can you speak
Well,
to
I
the
wouldn't say you're
financials?
thriving when you decide to close down your hotels and your businesses. No, I would say, but I'm very underlevered and everything, so that's good. But is it hurting yeah, it's hurting me, and it's hurting Hilton, and it's hurting all of the great hotel chains all over the world. It's hurting everybody. I mean, there are very few businesses that are doing well. Now, there are some that are, like, as an example, the Walmarts of the world, because everybody's lined up to get things and stock up their house and this and that. But sure, it hurts my business. But
And did you or anyone in your administration talk to anyone at the Trump Organization about the potential effects of the coronavirus?
no, I didn't speak to anybody. I speak to my sons, but I talk about the coronavirus, but not as it pertains to my business. They basically follow the rules. When they say close them down in New York, we close them down, or wherever they may be. I actually have them all over the world.
Will you no longer
And
go
when
to
they say close them down, we close them down. What, Kelly?
Will you no longer go to Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster?
Well, I have nothing planned at Mar-a-Lago, but right now I think Mar-a-Lago, I guess, I haven't even asked, but I imagine that's closed down just like a lot of other businesses in Florida, right? Go ahead.
do you expect your family company to seek government assistance if it's eligible?
I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what the government assistance would be for what I have. I have hotels. Everybody knew I had hotels when I got elected. They knew I was a successful person when I got elected, so it's one of those things. I guess I get paid $450,000 a year. I give it up. I put it back into the nation. I have to, by the way, you have to designate where you want it, so I oftentimes give it to opioid, research and things.
Specifically, not you.
But as far as the hotels and everything, I mean, I have to do what everyone else is doing. I would probably decide to close things up. I think it's a good thing. You don't want people getting together. And hotels and clubs and everything, you get together. We want to beat this deal. So I have many of them, hotels, clubs, things like that, where people get together. I would think it would be a good practice to close them up. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Mr. President, as you know, we've been talking a lot about masks. We've also talked about how not everyone needs to take a test. What about a temperature test? As we know, we all came into this room and got
Yeah.
tested before we entered.
Well, I do
the
it.
grounds.
I do it. I have temperature tests, and
But should
I
those
didn't ask everybody here, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had temperature tests.
Should those thermometers?
Otherwise, I'm gonna run off the
sensors
stage.
be distributed? Should they be on a mass distribution basis too?
Oh, I think they are pretty much. The easiest thing is the temperature. I think they are. I don't know. Are you learning a lot from the temperature test, Tony? Could you maybe discuss that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, they have a place. They're not infallible. I mean, there's so many ways to get around that. I mean, right now, every time, certainly here, every time I go into a different room, I get my temperature taken. But we see that on the outside that some people are
I
doing
took his
that.
temperature
He did.
twice, actually.
It was very low. There is a role for it under certain circumstances. What I don't see is a massive distribution of thermometers that are going to actually have a major impact on what I showed, what we need to do.
And I've seen things when Tony mentions thermometers. They aim something at your forehead, they stay this far away, boom, and they tell you what your temperature is. I said, I've never seen that before. I've learned a lot. It's incredible. Go ahead, the back corner.
Jen Pellegrino with OEM, thank you. This morning, the Washington Post ran a story suggesting that you delayed taking action on the virus in January and February. Dr. Fauci has indicated that your action in the Chinese travel ban helped America immensely. What do you say to the Washington Post?
Well, I love whoever you're with. That's because I think that's such a nice question. No, I think the Washington Post covers us very inaccurately, covers me very inaccurately. I saw this story. I think it's a disgrace, but it's the Washington Post, and I guess we have to live with it. It's a very inaccurate, quiet. It's a very inaccurate story. From many people, I get a lot of credit for having closed our country very early to a very heavily infected country. China, unfortunately, China. I wish China would have told us more about what was going on in China long prior to us reading about it, even though the news isn't exactly disseminated. As you know, China kicked the Washington Post out of China, and they kicked the New York Times out of China, and I guess the Wall Street Journal. That's okay. I mean, that's what they do, and I think it's a terrible thing they did. But I also think it's terrible when people write inaccurately about you, and they write inaccurately about me every single day, every single hour. And by the way, your group really, I really think, and I just say fair, not good or bad. I think you write very fairly and do very fair reports about the great job that all of us are doing, that this group behind me is doing. It's so insulting when they write phony stories that they know are fake news, because they're not insulting me, they're insulting everybody, these incredible people that have worked so hard, so long, that are thinking about nothing other than this invisible enemy. They have done such an incredible job, and they will continue, and we're going to win, and there'll be a lot of celebration when we win. And we're going to win with as few lives lost as possible. That's the game. Win with as few lives lost as possible. It's a tough enemy. It's a tough killer. Far bigger, far more vicious than ever before. But I appreciate you saying it, because the fact that we closed so early to China, and most people, hey, look, I was called xenophobic by Sleepy Joe Biden. I was called a racist by Democrats, a racist. I was a racist because I decided that I didn't want to have people that could hurt our country come in. And I was pretty much in a very small group of people, I will tell you. It was a tiny little group. Most people, even that worked in the White House, disagreed with me very strongly. Saving of those many weeks was a tremendous thing. And when they keep talking about acting early, that was the ultimate act. That was the biggest act, because we didn't. And then I also closed Europe early, very early. And I took a lot of heat for that too, but that was a good thing. Now they're doing similar things that we're doing. So I didn't act late. I acted early. I acted far before anybody thought I should be. I took tremendous criticism from the various papers, from many of the papers. So I very much appreciate the question. It might have been more of a statement than a question, but whatever it may have been, I appreciate it very much.
Mr. President, about this, so a number of the states have kind of done these different measures. We've seen California order one
Yes.
thing, New York, just be similar. Do you want all of the states to do one uniform?
No, they can do what they want to do. If California can get a mask sooner than we can get it for them, through all of the things we're able to do, I mean, we're going to end up with a big oversupply at some point. At some point, this is going away, and we're going to end up with a big oversupply. And you know what? In this case, that's going to be okay. But if Gavin can go out and order gowns faster, or masks, good masks faster, or other things faster, that's good. We do have a lot of, the coordination with the ships that we're sending in, as you know, the medical ships that we're sending in, and even cruise liners. We're going to be sending in probably cruise liners into some areas, in particular California and in particular New York. But if somebody can do something faster, if they can order that mask faster than us, I want them to be able to do
Sorry
it.
about the rules, sir. So people can't leave their homes. That certain businesses. That
We
are exempt.
coordinate very much with them,
You,
yes.
you don't want all those to be the same.
Well, it doesn't
nationwide.
have to be at this moment, because we have places in the country where, states where they have 2 people or 3 people, and those people are in quarantine. And you can't put on them what you're putting in New York, where you do have a tremendous problem. I mean, we have large portions of the country, middle America, where, they have a few people. So it may be a time, I hope that never happens, where we need to take very drastic action. But right now, that's not in the same ballpark. Yeah, go ahead, please.
We're at day 6 into your 15 days of recommendations.
Yes.
A lot of people are following them. Some people are not.
Yeah.
Do you think the American people are doing enough right now to slow the
I
spread
think
of this
they are,
virus?
and some people are not, but I think they are. I think it's going to have a very profound effect. I mean, we'll know a little bit more on day 14 and 15, and we'll
What's the
see.
plan once we get to
Well,
the
we're
end?
going to see. We have to see what the result is. We want to flatten that out, and we're going to see what the result is. And I just want to say, I'm going to negotiate a very large transaction, and I've been negotiating it for 2 days. So I'm going to take 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm going to leave it to Vice President Pence on the Hill, with the Hill, the various elements of the package. Steve, go ahead.
There's a number of groups are calling for the postponement or cancellation of the Olympics. Have you given him third?
No, I haven't. Look, we understand the difficulty of that, and he's a very good friend of mine. You take a look at Shinzo Abe. He's a great gentleman. He loves his country. We have an incredible relation. We just finished a trade deal with them, $40 billion trade deal with Japan. And Prime Minister Abe has a big decision to make. They have built one of the most beautiful venues I've ever seen They're all ready to go. It's not late. It's not over budget. It's not. It was just done flawlessly, and it's beautiful. And they're sitting back and saying, you know, I told him, I said, that's your decision, and it is his decision, and I know he's going to make it soon. I don't know what it's going to be, and I didn't think I should be influencing it at all. I mean, the job that Japan has done on that venue is incredible. So, I mean, there are options, obviously, including delay and maybe delay for next year, but that's totally up to them. We'll see what they do.
China's responsibility.
Since this story keeps popping up, when did you first learn that this was going to be a problem?
Well, you know, when I learned, I started doing the closing. So, you know, probably around that time. We didn't learn much. I think you're going to ask a little bit about China responsibility. I do think that, again, I have great respect for China. I like China. I think the people of China are incredible. I have a tremendous relationship with President Xi. I wish they could have told us earlier about what was going on inside. We didn't know about it until it started coming out publicly. But I wish they could have told us earlier because we could have come up with a solution. Tony Fauci and all of the people, the talent that we have, would have loved to have had 3 or 4 months of additional time if you knew that this was going to be happening. They didn't have that time. They read about it in newspapers like everybody else. China was very secretive, okay? Very, very secretive. And that's unfortunate. With that, I have great respect for that country. I have great respect for the leader of that country and like him. He's a friend of mine. But I wish they were able to, I wish they would have told us earlier, Steve, that they were having a problem, because they were having a big problem and they knew it. And I wish they could have given us an advance warning, because we could have had a lot of things. As an example, some of the things that we're talking about, where we order them as quickly as we can. If we had a 2 or 3 month difference in time, it would have been much better. Yeah, please.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because as you were saying, China was extremely secretive about this. Several of your advisors have been warning, have been critical of China. Secretary Pompeo was talking about it yesterday, and he had been saying so for quite some time. So why then, on January 24th, did you tweet that China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus, that the United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency?
Because
it will
it's
all
true.
work out well.
Because
Why were
it's
you
true.
saying that, though?
China has worked very hard. China has lost thousands and thousands of people.
Right?
No, they weren't transparent. They were transparent at that time. But when we saw what happened, they could have been transparent much earlier than they were.
A month after China
But
discovered
China,
the
just so
virus.
you understand, China is not a beneficiary here. China has lost thousands and thousands of people. China has gone through hell over this. They've gone through hell, and I've had conversations with President Xi. I just wish they could have told us earlier. They knew they had a problem earlier. I wish they could have said that.
Are you able to share, thank you for the numbers on the testing, by the way, are you able to share any other hard numbers on number of available tests, on number of ventilators in the federal stockpile?
Well, I'm going to leave that up to Dr. Fauci and everybody else, and I think the answer is we want to share them. I would imagine we want to share the numbers as, Admiral, do you want to discuss that?
500 billion masks that you cited, they're due for delivery in 18 months.
Not billion, no, not billion.
500 million masks, excuse me, thank you.
I said, wait a
The
minute.
500 million masks, they're due for delivery according to HHS within 18 months. The last number on ventilators we had was 12 to 13,000. Can you give us an updated number?
Well, there's
on that?
never been numbers like this. You know, a ventilator is a machine. It's a very complex machine. And to think that we have to order hundreds of thousands, nobody's ever heard of a thing like this. You know, when we had in the stockpile, we had thousands in a stockpile, thousands ready to go. That's a lot. All of a sudden, you need hundreds of thousands. And you're not talking about, you know, the mask is whether it's plastic or whether it's material, that's one thing. But you're talking about a very sophisticated, heavily computerized machine, and delicate. And you need hundreds of thousands of them. Nobody's ever heard of a thing like that. With that being said, General Motors, Ford, so many companies, I had 3 calls yesterday directly. Without having to institute, like, you will do this, these companies are making them right now. But to think of these numbers, it's pretty mind-boggling.
Do you have numbers to share, though, right now? Do you have numbers to share with us right now?
Well, Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, you bet. Well, we've spoken a lot about masks this morning, but the president's also given the task force a priority of assessing the availability and expanding the availability of ventilators. And on Monday, we will detail some very encouraging news for Americans. You speak about the number of 13,000. It is a little more than that we have in the national stockpile. But it's important to remember that that doesn't include the more than 100,000 ventilators that are in healthcare facilities and hospitals around America today. It doesn't include what will be produced, as the president said. We're seeing companies step forward. These manufacturers tell us that a ventilator actually isn't a very complicated piece of equipment, and many of them are literally surging forward to create more ventilators. But one of the more exciting developments in the last week, which we'll detail more on Monday, is that in the president's engagement with our healthcare community, we learned that ventilators that are currently used by anesthesiologists, that are used in outpatient clinics and in other procedures, can be converted to be used as ventilators for people struggling with the effects of the coronavirus. We've confirmed that a particular screen in that device can be changed readily. We're working with the FDA to approve that. But again, it's a great testament of the American people and our healthcare professionals that are stepping forward and bringing ideas forward that literally, as we'll document Monday, will increase the supply of ventilators by tens of thousands. But look, the president's made it clear. We want to make sure that all the incredible, courageous men and women who are serving in healthcare around America have the support they need, that our patients that are struggling with recovering from coronavirus have the equipment they need. And we'll have a lot of detail on Monday as we continue to assess
8 days ago that
what's
we would have
available.
1.4 million tests on board by the end of this week, by today. Do we have that? Can you give us the number that we have?
Let me let Admiral Goff speak to that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to answer your question and then try to persuade you to stop asking about a specific number, okay? So from March 2nd to March 14th, we have put over 10 million laboratory tests into the U.S. commercial market, and we expect that by March 28th to be well over 27 million into the market. So that answers your question, and let me tell you why it's not the right question. Not every lab can run every test. Not every test is completely self-contained. So the more important question is not how many tests are in the market. We got them in the market, but is to make sure that every segment of the market has the kind of test that they can use.
Admiral, we're using your numbers, trying to find out for the public if the things you've promised are happening.
Yes, they are happening. They are. We promised 1 or 4 million. There's 10 million tests in the market
And
now.
are the masks that are in the strategic reserve being deployed, Mr. Vice President?
Yes, the masks in the strategic national
So
stockpile.
it's not 13,000 anymore, it would be a lower number, would that be fair to say?
Masks are.
No, the ventilators, I'm sorry, the respirators. Thank you. We're trying to understand if the things we have been told sitting through these briefings for many days are happening and getting into the hands of the healthcare providers.
You understand it. You understand it.
We're trying to
You're an
understand,
intelligent
sir.
woman, Kelly. You understand exactly what he's saying. And what he's saying is rather incredible, because we inherited an obsolete, broken system. And when you hear the number of tests that we'll be providing and are now, it's incredible. And I've heard a lot of governors say the same thing. We took over an obsolete, broken testing system that wouldn't have worked for even a small problem, let alone one of the biggest pandemics in history. And what these gentlemen have done is incredible. I am going now to negotiate a great deal for our workers and our citizens. I'll be back tomorrow. We're probably doing this tomorrow. And if I might, I'd like to ask Vice President Pence to take over. And thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you all.
Sorry, Mr. Vice President.
How about back here?
Mr. Vice President, the military has sent planes to Honduras, Morocco, and Peru to pick up Americans and bring them home who have been stranded there. But there's still a lot of other Americans who are stranded and can't get home. So does the military plan to send planes to pick those folks up? Where will those planes be going? When will they be going? And can you assure Americans that who are stranded in foreign countries that they will be able to get home?
Well, we received a briefing this morning from the State Department about their efforts. And we want to be very clear. While the President has suspended all travel from Europe, including the UK and Ireland, suspended all travel, of course, from China since January, that any American who can get home can come home. They'll go through additional screening that's all been implemented and is working in an orderly way at a number of airports around the country. But there are instances, Morocco being among them, where there simply are not flights to get home. Our State Department has been working very closely with our embassies in those relevant countries. I was told this morning that all the way going back to bringing Americans back from China, that we have made individual efforts to bring home about 3,000 Americans. I think there is an ongoing effort to address that with chartered commercial flights that the government is providing. Obviously, also military transport is available, but our task force received a briefing this morning, and we would just encourage any American that's looking on from overseas, contact the local U.S. Embassy, let them know about your circumstances, and know that we're going to continue to work very diligently to get our Americans home.
All right, guys, last question.
Two quick ones, education and a medication one. You guys have announced that standardized testing is essentially canceled in this country. To the tens of millions of students out there, their teachers and their parents who are sort of scratching their head wondering, well, what does that mean? Obviously, a lot of this is driven by local school districts, by the state. Is there any federal guidance on this? And if not today, could you have Secretary DeVos or somebody come and explain that to the millions who are literally sitting at home trying to figure out what exactly that means?
Well, I think it's a terrific question, and we will bring Secretary Betsy DeVos here tomorrow or on Monday to address our efforts. The objective here was as people are embracing the president's 15 days to slow the spread, we have decisions by local school boards and local and state officials that have canceled school or suspended school for a time. And we wanted the Federal Department of Education to make it clear that the burden of standardizing testing, which back in my days as governor, I remember takes a number of days and sometimes up to a week to administer, is not going to be placed on schools. But we'll have the secretary here to address that very specifically, and it's a very good point on your part.
I mentioned I had a medication question, and I wanted to ask it while the president was here, because earlier he tweeted that there were two, let me just find it, two certain medications that when taken together, quote, have a real chance to be one of the biggest game changers in the history of medicine, and that they should be, quote, put in use immediately. Since he's not here, I can't ask him what he meant, but I'm wondering if Dr. Fauci or the Admiral could clarify if you have any sense of what he was talking about and whether his 74.5 million Twitter followers should be taking medical advice from him or from someone else.
The president brought together the top pharmaceutical companies in America and in the world a number of weeks ago, and they formed a consortium to work on a range of responses, beginning with therapeutics, which for a layman like me, that just means medicine to make you feel better. They're already going to work on that. We actually think, Dr. Fauci, I think there's some sense that that our great pharmaceutical companies may actually be producing therapeutics that will give relief to Americans struggling with coronavirus as soon as this spring. We also challenge them to work together as rapidly as possible to develop a vaccine going forward. And as Dr. Fauci has indicated, we brought a vaccine to clinical trials now the better part of a week ago, the fastest time in history. Now, it's the first phase of the trials, and people should understand, as our health experts have described, that there'll be a period of as much as a year and a half before we can make those vaccines available. But as the president said at this podium, there is some anecdotal evidence that several existing medicines may have brought relief to patients struggling in China and in Europe. And the president has tasked the FDA to work very rapidly to allow what's called off-label use for those. One is a malaria medicine. But this morning, I think the president reiterated the hopefulness that he feels about this, that because these are medications that are time honored and tested. They've been taken for many, many years. That we want to pursue, number one, making those available if someone's doctor believes that it's appropriate. The doctor would be able to prescribe that medicine, even though that's not indicated. That's called an off-label use. But the other piece is, as Dr. Fauci said, and I'll yield to him, in deploying those medicines, we're working specifically with one state to do so in a way that represents a clinical trial. So it would not just be compassionate use, which the medicines are already being used for in some jurisdictions today, but also we could study it and determine the viability of it. And in fact, we're working diligently right now with that supply chain to make sure that those medicines are available. Dr. Fauci, did you want to speak to that?
Sure. You know, it's essentially what I said multiple times from this podium, is that when you have, first of all, we're trying to develop de novo drugs that are not yet out there, not approved, that ultimately would be effective. And the way you prove that is to do a randomized controlled trial to prove safety and efficacy. I'm not totally sure of what the president was referring to, but I believe he's referring to a report that used both hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin together to have some possibility of being in effect. Many of the things that you hear out there are what I had called anecdotal reports. They may be true, but they're anecdotal. So the only thing that I was saying is that if you really want to definitively know if something works, that you've got to do the kind of trial that you get the good information. The president is talking about hope for people, and it's not an unreasonable thing to hope for people. So when you have approved drugs that physicians have the option in a decision between the physician and the patient, are you going to use a drug that someone says from an anecdotal standpoint, not completely proven, but might have some effect? There are those who lean to the point of giving hope and saying, give that person the option of having access to that drug. And then you have the other group, which is my job as a scientist, to say my job is to ultimately prove, without a doubt, that a drug is not only safe, but that it actually works. Those two things are really not incompatible when you think about that, particularly when you're in an arena where you don't have anything that's proven. We went through the same sort of thing with a little bit of a different twist during the HIV/AIDS epidemic until we finally developed drugs that were absolutely knockout drugs that were safe and that were effective. But in the beginning, there was that tension about that. So you really got to have a balance. I've got to do my job as a scientist, and others have other things to do.
Great.
Mr. Vice President, question for Dr. Carson? Yeah, question for Dr. Carson.
Let me just, if I may, let me just say, I hope this morning has been informative. We will be back again tomorrow. And I hope the American people are encouraged because of the incredible whole of government approach, because of our collaboration with states. You're seeing testing expanded all across the country. That incredible public-private partnership with commercial labs is now making testing available by the tens of thousands. We're working very diligently with an incredible response from American industry to make sure that personal protective equipment, and ventilators, and all the things that our healthcare providers need to meet this moment is there. But let me just say again what every American can do today. And that is, first and foremost, heed your state and local authorities. There are individual states, California, Washington State, and at this moment, especially New York, that have issued guidance to their citizens. And as the president said, we wholly support the leadership that those governors are providing in their states. But secondly, every single American can put into practice the principles of our 15 days to slow the spread. The president's coronavirus guidelines, as I said, we're 6 days in, and the purpose of these is not because every American is at risk of serious illness. As we said before, all our experts tell us, all the data shows, that the risk of serious illness to the average American remains low. But because the coronavirus is, we think, 3 times more contagious than the flu, to slow the spread, to literally lower that curve and spare Americans around our country with being exposed to or contracting the coronavirus, or worse, every single one of us can put these principles into practice. I recommend that you go to coronavirus.gov, sit your family down, call a neighbor and a friend, support efforts in your local community to put these principles into practice. And as people all across this country continue to do just that, I just know we'll get through this, and we'll get through this together. Thank you all.
Will there be a briefing of officers?
We'll be back with you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.